I just got to meet this guy Chris a little while ago. He charged my phone for me, so I already owe him something. But he's bringing some optimism with AI, and as somebody that is very like not with it, with AI, I will tell you that I'm more skeptical and a little bit nervous about it. So I'm looking forward to this, man. So Chris Honda, come on up, man.
All right, this is me. I'm this nerd, this goober. Now, before we start, standard disclaimer, I'm nervous. I'm a nervous Nelly. So I just have to throw some, please don't sue me. None of this is advice. I worked in finance, which is where that fun discretion comes from. If you're licensed one way, you can give advice, but you can't operate. I was the other side. I can only operate. I can't give advice. So this just comes from my finance days. Again, just to reiterate, this is not that kind of AI talk. I know we're all kind of either sick of it or we want more of the deep technical. This is neither. So, and also, I found that one of the most engaging ways, right, speaking of what Ken was saying about short form content, I'm bringing back the memes. I found it the most, I guess, easy way to engage. And so I hope you enjoy the lack of words and the very bad quality of images, right? So we're not talking bad memes, we're just talking bad photo quality. And then also, who was it? I think it was Brandon had the picture of the merit badge, right? So I'm a Boy Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout, so I felt like it was good to include this. I think that we learned a lot of good stuff, plus he got to share a merit badge. I got those, so I have to share that. I don't have much of a technical background, not none. I used to be a software engineer, but I studied Korean before, and before that I wanted to be a band teacher. So I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up, but I think we're all kind of in that same boat as well anyways. I've done a lot of different work at a lot of different companies, some of the more notable ones up here, including Whistic, where I currently work at. Thanks, Whistic, for keeping me around and not firing me. That's a fun thing. When I started as an engineer and how I got away from engineering is because I was so bad at it. I'd come to my boss almost every day and say, look, I'm just not good at this. And he said, well, I'm not firing you today, so thanks, Juan, for not firing me. Right, I also like to, like I mentioned, I did sales and I'm very bad at it. Oh, I didn't mention that. I did sales at one point and I was very bad at it. So I like to give everyone the heads up, the short of what I'm going to talk about, and give you a chance to leave and go listen to Mariana, because I'd rather learn about the CISSP than what I'm going to talk to you about anyway. So yes, AI is tough. I've talked with some of you just online or here earlier throughout the day, and yes, there's a lot of problems around AI. Bless you. There's a lot of problems around AI, but we do hard things, right? We're going to go over a little bit of the history of technology, the internet, and right, I think it's inspiring to see how we've solved some of these problems that now just seem otherwise kind of trivial. I guess I shouldn't say trivial, but comparatively. And we got through it, and we're going to do it again. We did it by just doing one thing at a time, small improvements every day, right? That's called eating the elephant one bite at a time, or moving a mountain one stone at a time. And then, right, we can always complain. There's always something that makes life harder. But, right, if you bring the solution, you say, hey, look, this is a problem and this is how I intend to fix it, that's how we get things done, because we like to follow people that and be around people that fix things. All right. Quick favor, right? Everyone's talked about their kids. I got to talk about mine real quick because she's just one of the coolest people in the world. I wish I could turn the camera, but if I could just have you all say hi real quick to May, I think it would make her night. She and my wife are on stream right now, so if you could say hi, May. Hey, baby. Thanks. You all made her alive. She wants to be an astronaut. She's going to be a stellar astronaut, and she's also going to be a ballerina and princess and amazing engineer. So let's. This is just trying to get her into as much of that as possible. So thanks everyone for that. All right, here we go. I told you we're starting with the memes, and the quality is terrible. This is what I meant by terrible quality, super choppy. So. Let's look at let's think about what we've done the last couple of years. I think I missed a slide. I think something got skipped. What I was supposed to ask is, how are you all doing? Like, I know, right, everyone's been talking a lot about AI and what that means, right? You look at all the conferences from late 2022 all throughout 2023 and what that's kind of been, right? When I was talking about this, it's like, yeah, it's another AI talk, right? There's been a lot of wild stuff happening, right? When ChatGPT first dropped, right? I know Anthropic was kind of a thing. I'm sure, I mean, at that time they called it Bard, right? Google Bard, now they're calling it Gemini, right? It was floating around, but all of a sudden it's like, hey, right? I'm getting folks like my parents asking like, hey, there's this cool thing called ChatGPT. It's like, yep, maybe hold off, right? Or at least be careful with that, whatever be careful means. And now everything is AI driven, right? Juan, team, cover your ears. But right, even my own company is now, we're like the AI VRM, vendor risk management, and you got to wonder sometimes, what does that mean? Juan, I know what that means. I'm sorry. And it's driven a lot of what is the fancy formal government name for rules? Regulation, laws, right? I mean, of course, right, since the EU did something, that has to end up being the flagship that everything else gets driven off of. But like, you look at Tennessee, I think Tennessee has a deep fake specific law. Each state's got their own thing, right? It's kind of like privacy, like GDPR did for privacy. Every state got their own flavor, and you don't know when the threshold is when you have to start abiding by it, but it's madness. It's wild, and I think that's part of what's kind of got us in the situation that we're in is, okay, what do we do? What are the rules that we have to follow? And I mean, right, I think regardless of what state your company is in, what state of development, if at all, your company or organization is in, there's a lot of, hey, what if, what is, a lot of not knowing, and that's scary. So what are we going to do about that? There we go. See, it's just out of order. This is supposed to be after that. How are you? But we've seen this before, right? Think about the cloud. Now, of course, this isn't an exhaustive history of technology. I'm not qualified. As much of a history nerd as I am, I'm just not qualified for this. But we've seen this before, right? The cloud, the last decade or so, right? Clouds, they're not moisture. It's just Linux servers that someone else owns. Who knows what this is? I know some of you should know this, but I want to see roughly if you know what this is. Okay, so this is not the early internet. This is the early precursor to what is now the internet. This is ARPANET. This is circa, I want to say 1969, if I'm remembering correctly. But right, who would have thought that however many years ago, this is 60-ish, 50, 60 years ago, that we'd be able to do what we're able to do with devices that didn't really exist in the average household back then, right? It's kind of amazing. So, right, a callback to we've done hard things before. Right, the young lady up here is Margaret Hamilton. She hand wrote that code, which ended up being used for, again, if you know the history better than me, please don't lambaste me, but I want to say it was the Apollo 11 mission. This is what got people into space, essentially, at one point, handwritten by this woman. And when we think about early personal computers, right, when typewriters were the most technologically advanced thing in some homes, this is what we had. Now look what we have. We have computers that have far more code, far more intricacy in it than it took to get us into space, onto the moon, than what got people introduced to what we consider pretty basic elementary, you weren't supposed to see that yet, pretty basic elementary technology. So we've done it before. We've done amazing things before, and we could do it now. There's a little flavor of that optimism, a little bit of that optimism, right? We've done hard things before. We can do it again. All right, I have a lot of people ask, I've had a lot of people ask, and you've probably asked yourselves and asked other people, should I use AI, right? Both personally in your work, should we use AI? I think facetiously, right? It's a pretty easy question. Do you want to use it? Great, go ahead and use it. It's pretty easy. You just sign away your rights, you click the I accept and understand the terms and conditions. You got to be sure not to read it, and then you start using it. If you don't want to, great. You just saved yourself a bunch of time spent not reading that legalese. A little less facetiously, right, especially when we're thinking about how we're going to handle this with our businesses. I'm sure most of you at some point have had to go deal with management in one of these two ways, right? You got folks that said, no, AI is too scary. I don't know how to handle this. I don't even know where to start. I don't know what questions to ask about. So no, we're not doing this. Everything hurts and I'm dying, essentially. And then there's the other half of it where, you know what, we're going to do it. We're going to be on the leading edge, right? We're just going to make things happen. We'll put it in a product and we'll figure out how to secure it afterwards. How many of these conversations have you had come down the pipe? Most of them, I imagine, right? Yep, we have to be the first AI-driven whatever product in our field, which is super fun, right? We call it extreme risk acceptance because we'll deal with it later. Deal with it later is code for we're never going to talk about this again, just in case you didn't know. There's two less common choices, right? I just don't understand this. This is frustrating. This is upsetting. And this is, I think, still better than either of these two, right? Because at least we're understanding, look, there's a problem. I know that there's value here. There's a lot of benefit that we have here. I'm just not sure where we start, right? But we've acknowledged that there's a problem. And, right, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm pretty sure there's some famous rule out there that says acknowledging a problem exists is the first step to solving that problem. So fantastic, but I have no solutions to provide for you. So this is a problem, go figure out how to fix it. Sure, I guess that's in our wheelhouse, we'll figure out how to work with that. Then there's the ideal, and this is part of what I'm suggesting, right, is that we understand that there's problems, right? There's problems for everything. But that we invest our time, our efforts, and our energy instead of just being the one to raise the problem. We say, okay, this is a problem, here's how I'd like us to go about fixing it, right? Sometimes it can be aspirational and say, well, we're here, this is eventually where we want to be, and here's some ideas to get us closer to that spot. Sometimes it's, you know what, I have no idea what good looks like, because sometimes we just don't. So what do we do at that point? You know what, I don't know what good looks like, but I know that this next step, this small thing, is slightly better than what we are currently trying to do. So let's try and do that. And you just do that over and over and over again until you're in the spot that maybe it's not where you want to be forever, but it's good enough, right? Sometimes we want, right, what do they say? Better is the enemy of the good or something, right? We're always looking for the perfect eventually. But you know what? At some point, doesn't have to be forever, we don't have to get complacent, but at some point, where we're at is good enough. Then we go and focus on something else that needs more urgent attention. So it's a lot of work, but by trying, we get closer. Right? Eating the elephant doesn't have to be one bite. This is something that, hi May, remember we were talking about this just a minute ago. May and I had this conversation. We're going to clean our room. We built a fort, we played with all the Bluey toys, and it was fantastic, and now the room is a wreck. And I say, I will clean up the stuff that I help play with. Not everything on the floor in her room is stuff that I've helped play with. So there were some tears in that. And she said, there's just so much stuff. Yes, baby, see, I told you we were going to talk about this again. And we sat down and had this talk about eating the elephant, right? Yes, sometimes there's lots of things to do. And now us as grown-ups, sometimes very sad, very busy grown-ups, where there's just more to do than there is time in the day or time of the week or time in the month. It behooves us to accept that that's just going to be the case sometimes. So what we do is we take a breath, realize that there's more to do in that day, in that week, in that month, and then we start doing something, knowing that eventually it'll get better. So, right, if you don't, one of the most common things that I've had people ask about is AI policy, right? Well, what should we do? What's the best policy? Well, the best policy is what you want it to be and can do. So if you don't know what you want for example, your acceptable use policy for AI, right? Like, I'm not sure what we want to allow our people to do. Well, what is the least you're willing to accept? And start with that. Or what is the most you're willing to accept and do that, right? You can work from both directions. It just depends on your risk appetite. But those are questions that I have to give the ever unhelpful it depends for, right? I mean, we all have that fun conversation. As risk professionals, we're going to hit this. We're all risk professionals. Some of us do security, some of us do compliance. A lot of us do everything in between, but we are all in risk. So I hope that isn't too offensive. I mean, everything feeds into risk is the way that I say it. Like I said, I'm a GRC nerd. So, and with that, I'm going to just get it out of the way and we'll circle back to it. Everything. Everyone is doing GRC to some extent, right? Everyone's into risk, even if you aren't actively doing that. But GRC isn't a team or a department or a function. It's a skill. And it's something that we all contribute with. And I think the thing that we should be thinking about before we do anything or say we're never going to do something, right, because it goes both ways, is what I like to call the Jurassic Park rule. Obviously, I didn't come up with it. Dr. Malcolm over here did, and in a less eloquent way, right, it's stopping to think whether you should do something before you think if you could, right? It's easy to think about the possibilities of what's out there, and I think you should. I'm really bad at that. And I think there's a lot more visionary people that have a lot more outsized impact because they think, what is possible? What can I make possible? And that's great. Before you shoot yourself in the foot, step on the rusty nail, right? If we're getting into Home Alone, because it's getting cold back at home for me, right? So we're getting to Christmas movies. Home Alone is a Christmas movie. Think about whether you should, right? And if your conclusion is that, hey, look, AI just isn't for us, that's okay. And I I would recommend and support your decision to then go to leadership, go to your management, go to your product team and say, hey, look, I don't think this is why we should be using AI in this way because, right? I want to help protect us. This is our business's mission is to make money. I think this is going to cost us a lot more in the long run, right? It's okay to have those disagreements because you're there to help support and protect the organization. Boring slide, just a heads up, no pictures, or at least no fun pictures. Can't remember if there's no pictures at all. I said it before. And a plug for last year's Simply CyberCon. I've been really fortunate to be part of the Simply Cyber community. I spoke last year, and like I said, GRC, nerd. So if you want to hear me ramble about that a bit more, go ahead. If you don't have a severe hatred for GRC, I know that's a thing, and especially it tends to be a little bit more there in the more technical security world. I know because I've played both sides. I started security, and then I got a little into more to compliance. So I understand the frustrations, but I mean it as a compliment, is that GRC is a complementary skill set that is not owned by any one department or team. Your org might have a team that's risk or compliance, but I think by doing GRC things, you are doing yourself and the rest of your organization a favor because you are able to speak that common language that businesses care about. How do we avoid risk? How do we manage risk? Which really means how do we make more money and how do we keep more of it? All right, so what do we do? Joe, I have about 5 more minutes, right? Rock on. So what do we do? Right, we've had discussions. Talk with your kids about it. Volunteer in your schools. I've been more and more conferences where educators, where people working education adjacent in schools and universities, just saying, look, there's varying levels of technical competency. It's never too late, never too early to start working with your kids, to start working with others in the educational community, right? Your kids spend 8+ hours a day at school. Might as well make sure that they know how to do so safely, right? Like we heard Joe talk about earlier tonight, right? There's the political level. I mean, I know he didn't go that deep into how politics, how government works with it, but I mean, he made the leap. There's obviously some sort of connection there. So I guess also, right, we have election day coming up pretty soon. Be engaged citizens, right? We're in a profession, we have unique insights that a lot of other people don't. This is a unique opportunity for you to give back to society and make the world a better place, even if it's just a small corner of where you happen to live, right? Be involved. Work with others. I feel like we're getting like Sesame Street-esque, right? But nothing happens in a bubble anymore, right? We don't have we're past the day, and it's really sad for me because I think I missed that ship a little bit, where, you know, we just kind of sit in front of a computer in the basement, we build something really cool, we ship it, and we don't have to talk to anyone. Yeah, we can't do that anymore. So embrace it. I get drained by being around people too, but you know what? We get more, right? People are multipliers, especially if you're willing to put out that energy a little bit, all right? Work with people and see the outsized impact that comes from collaboration. In other words, Mr. Nike says, just do it, all right? It doesn't matter what it is. Try your best to make something good, think of something good, and just do it. You can always try something different later. Another boring slide. Right, this is something I think a little bit what some of you might have been hoping for, right? How do I do AI, right? This is technically there, or a little bit closer. This is, if you were asking me in all seriousness, hey, this is a specific problem that I have with AI risk related, this is something that I'd tell you about. These are some resources I'd tell you about, because there's no sense inventing the wheel. I've had a lot of conversations saying, hey, my boss said that we want to come up with our own framework and standard and process for how we're going to handle this particular. Someone's probably done it, because there's people that work at NIST, that work at ISO, work in somewhere in the EU, whoever publishes the CAP AI assessment for the EU AI Act, right? There's organizations like OWASP, I was going to say ISO, I already said ISO, but there's organizations where people volunteer hundreds and hundreds of hours a year, or where it's their paid full-time job is to say, look, these are things that we have discussed over decades sometimes, and have found to be good practices, right? I'm always worried when someone says best practices, especially when it comes from a lawyer. That's extra scary. But right, don't reinvent the wheel. You're more than welcome to go on Google. There's this fantastic thing called Google, and chances are you'll find something. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to fit everything the way that you need it, because it's just never going to do that, right? It's kind of like both Ken and Brandon said. You can pull stuff off Google. It's not going to fit you exactly, but you have a starting point, and that's the most important thing that we said back here, right? Is just to start. The path will become more imminently clear as you do more things, is essentially what I'm saying, all right? I mean, it's the same thing that we learned about cooking, about baking. about working with wood and electronics, right? Building computers, about coding, about networking, infrastructure, right? The way that we learned how we do our craft is just by doing. And I put out, maybe in a bit reductive manner, but this is just another skill. This is just another piece of technology, another piece of software that we get better at by doing. The more we touch, handle, practice, break, unbreak, that's how we get good at this. And I think that's a big part of how we get the scaries. I know I didn't really hit that before. One of my big things is I like things to not be scary, and I like to help them get less scary. I'm telling you, that's the magic trick, the silver bullet for anything, getting anything to be unscary, is just do it. Do your best, do it as safely as you can, and then you expand your borders a little bit more. You expand what you're willing to do and willing to try just a little bit more. Right, set up that home lab, for example. Build something. I got a good friend that I do some consulting work with. He's been trying to build a less expensive version of Jarvis, the Iron Man Jarvis. So, and he's learned so much. Like, when he started that, like, I was telling him, like, hey, here's some things that you might want to look at. And now he's talking to me about things that, like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I think it's a very non-specific, but I hope a very applicable example of, look, like, the more you do, the more things you're going to find out. The exponential learning that you already do by reading and talking about it just gets that much steeper once you start actually doing. All right, I told you this is what we're going to talk about. I think I'm just like, ooh, I'm like 30 seconds ahead. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for coming to Simply Cyber. This is just one of the best communities. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and I hope there's not too much regret staying here instead of listening to how to pass the CISSP. I mean it 100%. I think that was very engaging, and I'd encourage you to go listen to the other Track 2 stuff. They're fantastic folks. They have so many great things to talk about. If you'd like a copy of the slides, it's here. I think they're public. If not, request access, and I'll definitely do that. I also stay off LinkedIn because Ken is like my hero. I didn't know him until before, but he's my hero and about staying off social media. But LinkedIn, I kind of have to for my job. So I'm happy to chat there about anything vendors management, because again, GRC nerd. But thank you so much for your time, for your questions, and if you have any others, we're happy to talk to you about it afterwards.